So we were following the bronchial tree through each of the lungs. So after we get to the terminal bronchiole, we then see a transition into the microscopic respiratory bronchioles. And that also shows the transition between conduction zone and the respiratory zone. So in the respiratory zone, it's going to be composed of the respiratory bronchioles, which are then going to subdivide into multiple alveolar ducts, as we can see, multiple branches there. And then those alveolar ducts are going to lead into something called alveolar sacs. Okay, so, or saccules. So the sacs, a lot of people call them like grapes, like a bunch of grapes, like a bundle or whatever. Uh, the thing is, if you were to hold a cluster of grapes, like still on the stem and everything. Thinking like Greek times, right? They've got the whole cluster on the stem. The thing is, with alveolar sacs, the individual alveoli, which would essentially be analogous with the actual grapes, they're actually all kind of interconnected. Okay, they don't have like borders completely. There's no complete border. So they look like a grape cluster from the outside, but they're not really on the inside. So it's not the best analogy to describe an alveolar sac, but it kind of works. So if you can just remember that it's really only appearing that way from the outside, but in the inside, it's like all of the grapes are actually combined with each other. All right, moving on. Okay, so we have those individual alveoli, right? Now, when we look at a single alveolus, which is just one, right? So alveoli would be plural, and then just looking at one alveolus, right? So alveolus, cool. We have a few different cells that we need to identify, right? So there are two types of alveolar cells. We have type 1 and we have type 2. So that's easy. So type 1 alveolar cell is going to be the simple squamous cell of the simple squamous epithelial tissue. Okay. Um, so you can see like right here is one cell, and then it kind of like loops around to make a new alveolus, right? And so you can see they're really thin. They're composed of like maybe 1 to 2 cells, um, making up that, or well, like probably more because you can see the separation over on the lateral walls. But in this like little cross section, we're really only seeing 2 complete cells because we can identify the nucleus. But anyways, that's type 1 alveolar cell. And that's where you're going to actually see gas exchange. So you can see here is a capillary, and here we can see red blood cells, and that is where we're going to have that respiratory membrane, and we can have gas exchange. All right, so gas exchange happens with type 1 alveolar cells. The type 2 alveolar cells are also called septal cells, and so you can see them in blue. And septal cells are going to be found sitting in between the type 1 alveolar cells. All right, now the really important thing about septal cells or type 2 alveolar cells is that they are going to secrete alveolar fluid. And within that fluid is something called surfactant. Now, surfactant is basically a mixture of like phospholipids and lipoproteins and whatnot. But this type of liquid, this type of fluid, is going to help keep the alveolus from collapsing on itself, right? I mean, think about it. It's just this thin little, very few cells, one single layer, right? How does it keep from collapsing in on itself? And it's because of the septal cells, it's because of the surfactant that they are going to secrete. So if you look over here, we have an example of an alveolus, and there are water molecules surrounding the alveolus, right? And so because of hydrogen bonds, water molecules will typically want to attract to each other and, move around and whatnot, and it'll allow or result in a collapsed alveolus. However, with surfactant, which again is like a combination of phospholipids, it's a hydrophobic solution. We keep those hydrogen bonds from forming, and we keep those water molecules apart, and so we can have a nice inflated alveolus. Yay! Okay. Some other things we have in here in the alveolus are alveolar macrophages, which are a type of immune cell. They're phagocytic cells, so they are going to actually remove dust particles or other debris that could end up in the alveolar space. I think it's something like 2 million macrophages per hour die, and they get moved up our respiratory tract and we swallow them. Okay. In terms of surface area in the lungs, we have about 300 million alveoli, uh, and that makes up about 140 square meters within the lungs, if you're, looking at surface area. Okay. So this is really where we have gas exchange, especially with, the pulmonary, not pulmonary. Oh, I'm blinking. So sorry. Not pulmonary. The external respiration. Well, I guess it could also be pulmonary respiration. But anyways, we introduced it as external respiration, right? So that's where we have the gas exchange occurring with the actual pulmonary capillaries, right? So